All right, thank you everyone for coming in. This is Smudboy, and we're talking to Nicholas Spargo of Cloud Runner Studios and his game he's developing called Melancholy Republic. Thank you very much for joining us, Nicholas.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And for full disclosure, I'm a contributor to his Kickstarter project. I was a contributor to it previously, and I thought I'd grab him and get him on the line and see what his project is all about. So let's just get the elephant that's been sort of looking at this game. It's an RPG Maker style game. Why would the average gamer of today care about games made by an engine like RPG Maker? What's the draw?
Um, well, I don't think any gamer should ever decide on the game they're going to buy on the engine. There's a tremendous amount of variety out there. I think developers pick their engine based on what's required in terms of their design for the game. An RPG Maker, I think RPG Maker is a fantastic engine. It's really opened up game development to a lot of people. It takes it from just being a business model to being a hobby. And a lot of people can actually make games in their free time on RPG Maker. So there's a huge community behind it. RPG Maker does offer actual benefits to us, which is the reason we use it. The main thing is that it's a cheap, very lightweight, easy kind of software for us to use, so we can focus really on the things that are really important to our game. So our game's all about story. Our game's all about these beautiful environments and music and characters, and so we don't need to really shell out making our own engine or going down a kind of more fancy route. RPG Maker does everything that we need it to do, and it just does so many of those mundane tasks for us, so we can really concentrate on a lot of the other tasks. You know, in particular, being small, having an engine which can handle a lot of the tasks for you is really helpful. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's about the project, it's about the final product, about what you can create. And I think what we've made is really, I think it's really cool. Most people are often surprised that it is an RPG Maker game because of the way it looks.
There are actually quite a lot of genres made by RPG Maker, not just RPGs,
Mm.
but action games, what have you.
Yeah,
There's like the Witch's House. There's
the
Seraphic
horror games are
Blue.
quite.
Yeah, there's one very famous. It's called To the Moon, which I think most people
Yeah.
are well acquainted with. But what sets Melancholy Republic apart from these other games? There's hundreds of them out there, but what's special about yours?
So Melancholy Republic is, to me, I mean, I absolutely love the idea, and it's something I really believed in when we came up with the story concept. It's really different compared to any other RPG Maker games or story-based games because it falls into the genre of tragedy. It falls into these sad short stories and a kind of epic political plot, which hasn't really been handled by any games in the way that we're trying to approach it. I was quite fascinated by the idea of, firstly, a politician being the main character, because that's not a very common thing. But also the fact that, in our Western culture specifically, we have this great history of tragedies and heartbreaking stories, and I find that's very underutilized in video games. And I think, indie video games in particular offer this great platform to be really experimental in terms of the gameplay that comes out. So, there's so many experimental, crazy indie games with these, that big publishers would never go for because, it's only something really independent people can experiment with. And I think in terms of story, I think that's something that we can also branch into. So, being an indie developer, um, I like the idea that we're doing stories that, people haven't done before and engaging people in a different way, making them think about different topics. So ours really stands out as different. It's not just a horror game. It's not just a adventure game. It really falls into its own category of this tragedy, and it's inspired by, a few quite tragic games or quite sad games. There's not many, but a few that particularly which I was quite fond of are um, a little bit of The Last of Us. The Last of Us has a really, kind of poignant, heartfelt story. To the Moon is another example with a really heartfelt story. They're not quite tragedies, but they are quite heartfelt and moving and quite dark in places. And also JRPG, quite a famous JRPG called Lost Odyssey, which was an Xbox 360 game, which was full of these kind of short, sad stories.
Right.
Which,
Yeah.
yeah, and I really loved those. I really loved that aspect that this game was full of all these really sad, short stories, and I remember, years ago playing Lost Odyssey and reading these short stories in the game, and like almost being moved to tears because some of them are just so engrossing and so moving. Yeah, so and these kind of things really captured me. I wanted to make a game which really got people caring and really almost invested and heartbroken. And I think it's an interesting it's definitely an interesting angle down in the storyline, video game stories that I really wanted to bring across to players in Melancholy Republic.
You did mention that the characters are politicians or they're political, and I can tell you're going to have an uphill battle telling a story about a politician and us to like that kind of character. So,
Mm.
is this a tragic story that focuses on the political machinations of these characters, or is it more of a character-driven personal tragedy that just so happens to involve a political setting?
Um, yeah, it is very much more of a personal story. It's interesting because the character, the politician, as you say, politicians aren't particularly popular, but the game has to be put into context of its own world, and in its own world, this is a place which had a monarchy. It had a royal family for a very long time. It was a very powerful kind of royal state, and it was overthrown. It's a very young republic, so democracy is almost new to it, and this it highlights certain problems which come about because of that, and the kind of corruption which is instilled by the creation of a new republic by these people who controlled the land or the money of the country. So in this story, Claire Lockridge, who's a politician, she also comes from a noble family. So she is very much part of that group of which is relatively unpopular. Um, but just I think as well, politicians can also be some of the most charismatic and loved people as well. I think obviously someone like Barack Obama is a good example. If you look back to when he was rising to power, people, generally people really loved this guy, Barack Obama, because he had so much aspirations and ambitions and everything. And of course, reality turns out that it's much more difficult, and he gets less popular with time there because of the struggles that he has. But yeah, I think someone who has high aspirations to change a country, to really um, have an impact on their world, I think that's is something that people do fall in love with, and great leaders are something that people really care for. And Claire Lockridge definitely falls into that category of someone who has these great ambitions to change a country, make it a better place. However, just like in our world, reality can sometimes, bite back, and yeah, it is something we'll explore that, which is, in a way, parallels our own world, our own themes, and that's something I'm going to bring in. But yeah, it is also, while it does cover, those kind of broader themes to do with politics and, those kind of parallels, it is also very about personal faults, personal flaws, and how those can actually bring about kind of tragic storylines as well.
It seems like you're interested in the persona of what a politician is, or the cult of personality surrounding their motivation and behavior. What were sort of the influences you've had for making such a title and trying to tell such a story?
Um, well, I would say, for me, a lot of JRPGs were a big inspiration. There's not quite an example in terms of the story that I can pick up from any other game, because I do think ours stands as quite unique.
What JRPGs can you say that you could definitely say you were influenced by?
I'd say the biggest ones were probably the whole setting, the whole idea for this kind of one city and everything was brought about by this kind of this kind of chats that you have with your friends. And I always used to say, like, like Final Fantasy VII in particular. It's this game, and I remember as a kid, and I played it for hours. Especially as a kid, because you're not as good at games. You play hours and hours and hours, and eventually you get to the point where you leave Midgar, which for most gamers only takes a couple of hours, but for a kid it takes like 8 or 10 hours. And you leave, and you just think, oh my God, we've only just begun. Like we're only leaving. I thought the whole game was going to be set in this city, and I like that idea of the game is great, it's a sprawling adventure, but I do like the idea that of a game set in one city, localized in one area, and it's a story about this one city and these characters within the city, and that was definitely something that inspired the idea. Um, it's I definitely too many games try to be too grand in scope, if you know what I mean, and I find that so what ends up happening is, if we got loads of towns, we got 20 towns in the world map and everything, but each one of those towns is then kind of put down into quite smaller chunks. So you get to this town, you think, oh, this town looks great, but it's really only made up of 8 or 9 maps, and then you leave the town and you're going out into the field to go grind again. And I think focusing our story in just one city means we can really focus on those kind of details and really expand it and make it massive, if you know what I mean. But yeah, so Final Fantasy VII was definitely inspiration there. Like I said, in terms of the kind of sad themes, Lost Odyssey definitely comes into it a bit. And funny enough, even games like, a Telltale series, The Walking Dead, and The Last of Us, which are obviously very different, but I think they're definitely part of that kind of dark, kind of sad games that are really popular at the moment. I think gamers definitely are interested in sad storylines.
Now, you were talking about grinding before. I was going through the Kickstarter page. Is there actually any combat in this? It seems like it's a game focused primarily on exploration and
Mhm.
dialogue or storytelling through dialogue with various mini games, which makes it feel a little like a novella or like a Japanese light novel. Is this
Mhm.
similar to a visual novel genre of game with an added gameplay of exploration and mini games? Do these elements achieve effective storytelling? Like, what are you trying to accomplish with that?
Yeah, so the main core of the game is it is a story-based game, very much like To the Moon. However, To the Moon had only like basically one gameplay mechanic, so I definitely wanted to change that up and have more gameplay mechanics in the game and have more freedom for the player to explore a city. But yeah, it is a story-based game. There is no combat because combat would be forced in this story. It wouldn't make sense for our politician to be running around with a nice two-handed greatsword, swatting down frogs in the slums and things like that. So yeah, so it is a story-based game. It does stick to the exploration, cutscenes, talking to people, interacting, finding hidden quests and areas. And that's, for me, it was basically the game that I really wanted to play. And I think like To the Moon was a game I really loved and I thought was a great story. But I did want more kind of freedom than that. So that was definitely something I wanted to bring into Melancholy Republic. Um, yeah, in terms of like you're saying, these other mechanics and everything, I don't want to create kind of force mechanic. I remember in To the Moon, there's basically a puzzle sequence, which was the gameplay mechanic. There's like a little jigsaw puzzle, which I find very taxing. I don't really like jigsaw puzzles. Maybe it's just a personal thing. But it's definitely I didn't want to kind of force that kind of mechanic on people. So our game just has very simple, but just fun things to break up the flow of the game and the pacing. Um, Things like just kind of sneaking, basic sneaking, lots of conversational choices, which so you can affect outcomes and affect what happens in different chapters. Also things like canvassing for votes, solving puzzles, and basically kind of seeing how you can deduct things because Claire is a really smart individual, and so you controlling Claire have that kind of access to her intelligence as well. Um, in terms of the light novel, I really like visual novels. So I think some visual novels are fantastic. Uh, in terms of this game, I mean, yeah, maybe it could have been done as a visual novel. There's definitely something that crossed my mind. I've always wanted to make a visual novel, um, but in terms of having the city to explore and everything, I think it's just far more engaging than it would be as a visual novel, if you know what I mean. I think the story would struggle. This particular story would struggle as a visual novel. Yeah.
That's very interesting because usually when you think of visual novels, they're just pure story with some occasional dialogue options. But this, you're
Mm.
saying no, 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 RPG Maker with the dialogue options, with the exploration, with the mini
Yeah.
games. This is exactly what you wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Good to hear. Okay, so now this is the second time you've gone to Kickstarter for the same project. I noticed that, and you did so. I think it didn't work out. You didn't restart it within a week or so. What have you learned this time around, and what are you doing differently?
Yeah. So it was. I think at the same time I saw there was another project, Deadwood, which is doing really well, and they did a similar thing. I don't think they struggled to be funded the first time around, but they ended early and then they relaunched, and I think they were funded really quickly then. So we decided to relaunch again at a lower funding goal, asking for half the funding goal, just because we think it will be more reasonable to achieve. It's more desirable for people to back then. Um, the reduced funding goal is there only because I decided to invest half the required funds myself. I didn't want to, to me, asking for just half the amount and saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to deliver the same game," that's just, to me, that's just total BS if a developer said that. But for me, it's a very personal project. It's something I'm very invested in. So I decided to invest my own money into it. So with that, with a lower goal, we hope more people will be engaged. But also, from our first one, we actually developed a large community of people who are really interested in our game. So we have this kind of great base of almost fans already who are really interested in our concept and our world, and have been like really supportive and really helped get spreading the word, and really helped get the game a real kind of kick from the start, on Kickstarter. And so we've definitely got a better start from it. So I definitely think we learned the importance of having a kind of community of fans, and it was something definitely of an oversight of mine. I never really worked on doing a kind of pre-Kickstarter and building up kind of support and things like that. So this time it's definitely talking to more journalists, getting out more interviews. It's always a struggle because it is such a crowded market, and even though I think our game really stands up as unique and different, it is still very much about with most journalists, and I think you'll agree is a game might be the most interesting thing ever, but is it going to get is it the kind of thing our readers want to see? Is it going to get us kind of views? Is it interesting enough to put as an article for the effort to be put into it? So yeah, it's definitely hard to kind of put your game across as that unique selling point to all journalists, to make it stand out to them. So yeah, this time it's just carrying on with trying to get coverage for the game and just being more active on our social network and trying to engage more people as many people as possible, which has been so far it's been going really well. We've seen like much more interest in a much shorter period of time in the game, so we're really hopeful that we're going to be funded this time.
This is my last question to you, and I think you somewhat answered it. What kind of general advice can you give to people who are starting off or doing a Kickstarter for the first time?
Yeah, so the first thing would, like I just said, would be to definitely show things like really early. For me, maybe it was like too much of a baby. I didn't want to show it until it was ready. But I definitely think showing people early, getting other developers following you and talking about you and talking to other people is really important for spreading the word and just getting that kind of group of people who are interested in your game. That was definitely number one most important thing. Um, and two, I'd say it's something we didn't do, but I think it's a really clever idea, is actually contacting a lot of websites and specifically sites that would cover your type of game, and trying to get articles ready for release on the day of a Kickstarter. I think that's a good strategy, which I've seen a few very successful games do, in kind of recent times when I've been looking at it. Because what that does is then on the day your Kickstarter comes out, then you've coincided quite a few articles to kind of come out on the same day as it, uh, and you definitely get a much better pickup of kind of flow of traffic on a Kickstarter. You probably have a better chance of being staff picked on Kickstarter as well, because Kickstarter definitely are going to do a staff pick to a game which they think is likely to be funded, because it's obviously in their interest for games to be funded. And if they see a kind of large influx very early on in the game, then yeah, I think you definitely get a better position in the algorithm of Kickstarter and a better chance of a staff pick.
Well, great. Thank you very much. This was Nicholas Spargo from Cloudrunner Studios, and he is on his Kickstarter for Melancholy Republic.